All right. And hello, everybody. It's me, Jose, and I want to welcome you all to another weekly walk here in Central Park. Now, I hope everyone is enjoying this lovely September day because today we've got an exciting journey to dive into. Tomorrow, of course, is the fall equinox, so that means we're officially starting the start of the new season. So here in the park, we're already starting to see many of these changes take place all around us. So you can see it in the trees, the weather, and of course, even the wildlife. Now, on our walk for today, we're going to explore the north end of Central Park, and we're going to witness just some of these changes for ourselves. But of course, before we continue, let's go ahead and check out the Zoom controls as we always do. All right, and hopefully you folks should be able to hear me right now, but let's go ahead and start off with the Zoom controls real quick. Now, feel free to use the chat feature on your Zoom control bar. If you have any comments or questions, you can use the Q&A feature, which is on the control bar, to ask any questions. My colleague Desiree, she's going to be on the back end, and she'll answer any questions that you folks might have. And we'll also have some polls as well. You'll see them pop up in your screen, and I'll share the results once everyone has voted. And of course, our mission here at the Conservancy is to preserve and celebrate Central Park as a sanctuary from the pace and pressures of city life, enhancing the enjoyment and well-being of all. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Now, autumn, of course, is pretty much upon us. Now, here in New York City, we typically hit peak fall foliage colors roughly around late October or so, especially here in Central Park. Now, over the last few days, you might have started to experience just some of these changes firsthand. So the most obvious way to know that we're in the new season is to, well, simply look up and feel the changes in the air. So first of all, we have to ask ourselves the question, are the leaves changing colors in waves, or is the weather starting to cool down just a little bit? If so, then there is a good chance that we'll soon be experiencing even more of these natural changes here in the landscape. However, as those of us in temperate climates know, you don't really need to witness the colors changing in order to know that fall is here. Sure, deciduous trees like maples are, of course, well known as harbingers of autumn, but sometimes it can be as subtle as noticing certain changes in the environment, like the arrival of colorful migratory songbirds in the bushes, or perhaps maybe you've noticed that some of the trees, they're now starting to drop their seed pods. So today we're going to concentrate on the Northwoods and the surrounding areas as we examine the signs of fall here in Central Park. All right, so we'll take a look at our map first, as we always do. So we're going to start off here at the west side of Central Park at 106th Street. Then we're going to ascend the Great Hill, which is one of the highest points in the park. From there, we're going to walk just a little bit north towards the Block House, and we're going to explore the Northwoods as we look for signs of fall in this woodland. We're going to end things off at one of the waterfalls that's created by the lock. So let's start off right here at 106th Street along the west side of the park. Now, officially, this is called Stranger's Gate. So the word stranger in this case referred to visitors and newcomers from all around the world. And here in the most heavily visited park in the planet, I think the name is, of course, quite appropriate for us. Now, just behind the benches that face the street, you can see this rock outcrop that's jutting out. So we're actually standing at the foot of the Great Hill, which is one of the largest outcrops of Manhattan schist here in the park. So at its point, you can expect it to stand at roughly 135 feet above the sea level. So why don't we go ahead and walk right up these steps towards the top of the hill and see where it leads to. Now, nestled among the rocks as we ascend the hill, you can find this wood aster that's currently blooming. So there's actually a number of native varieties of plants called asters here on the East Coast, and they can often be found growing along the sides of roads or perhaps maybe on the edges of woodlands. So like many of the wildflowers that we're going to be seeing today, the wood aster blooms in late summer or early fall. I like to actually watch out for blooms like these even before the leaves start changing colors. And after coming up these steps, we arrive at the top of the Great Hill. These days, it feels more like a grassy open meadow than perhaps maybe a summit. It's easily accessible to most visitors, so you'll often find folks here from the local community having a picnic or perhaps maybe going for a run around the gravel pathway. Now, over the years, the Great Hill has, of course, seen lots and lots of changes. Now, I always like to show folks this one particular illustration when I'm up here on a tour or perhaps maybe on a weekly walk. But this one I think really speaks to the park's evolution throughout the decades. So back in the 1800s, when Upper Manhattan was still a relatively rural place, you might have found views like this one greeting you at the top of the Great Hill, which back then was actually still called Mount Prospect. So at that time, you could see way out beyond the East River into Long Island. Today, these large, older trees now obscure the view, but I'm always fascinated by the changes in the landscape. All right, so let's continue on with our walk. And right around the corner, we come to this walkway leading to an area known as the Children's Glade. Now, the Great Hill is a number of these glades, which are basically carefully hidden openings amongst the woods. Sometimes in the weekday, you might see families here, or perhaps maybe school groups, school children from the local neighborhood. It's definitely a nice little spot to just sit and relax when it's quiet. Now, right along the side of the glade, you can see a bed of these native sunflowers. These sunflowers, these are called sunchokes, and they bloom around late summer and early fall. So they're a good reminder of the changes taking place around us during this time. Now, here's a close-up of the sunchoke flower. The sunchoke is sometimes called the Jerusalem artichoke, and you can actually eat the roots of these plants, which, yes, apparently do taste just a little bit like artichokes. So these were actually an important survival food for many early Americans. So just in case you get lost in the woods and you're looking for something to eat to survive on, all you need to do is to look for the bright yellow sunflowers here. All right, so let's keep continuing to explore the woods and the glades of the Great Hill. So we're going to follow this pathway. This pathway is actually along the top of a ridge overlooking the street below. Walking through here sometimes reminds me of being out in a remote forest. But of course, once you hear the cars and the street traffic below, then you realize you're actually just steps away from the hustle and bustle of Upper West Side. Now, since we're already in September, one thing you might notice around Central Park are all the very, very hungry squirrels that are fattening up for the winter. Now, this little one that approached me was especially persistent for food. But of course, it's important to remember that feeding wildlife is not allowed in parks because it actually deprives these animals of the nutrients that they need to survive. So while it might seem like a good idea to feed them pieces of bread or crumbs, squirrels need a lot more nutrition than can be found in processed foods, especially if they want to gain as much healthy weight as possible for the upcoming winter season. In fact, Central Park squirrels, they don't really need any help at all when it comes to feeding. They're surrounded by an abundance of food sources like these acorns from the many, many, many oak trees that we have here in the park. So they're perfectly capable of feeding themselves. Now, right around the corner, you'll find these native flowers. These are called phlox. Phlox can usually be found blooming in the late summer. So they're another good indicator of the arrival of autumn. Now, these are commonly planted in many gardens as perennials. In fact, you might have some in your garden right now since they're commonly sold in many nurseries and they add a pop of color to the early fall landscape. And not too far away, we can see these plants known as the northern sea oats. Despite what the name might suggest, sea oats, you can't actually eat them for breakfast. So they're not actually related to the stuff that you might put in your bowl every morning. However, sea oats, they are a crucial species that's native to our area. So they're often planted as ornamental grasses in Central Park, but they can also be found growing in the wild, especially along coastal areas. And in these coastal areas, they actually do a lot to help prevent the erosion of sand and soil. And during the fall time, the flat seed heads that you folks are looking at right here, they actually turn a deep copper color. Now, we're not there just yet, but do expect some changes to start happening soon. All right, and from here, we're going to exit out of the wooded trails of the glade and back onto the main pathways. And if we look down below, we can see that the foliage of some of the trees and shrubs, they're now starting to exhibit some of these fall color changes. So these red-orange leaves, for example, they belong to the service berry. Service berries, basically, they grow from Quebec all the way down to Georgia. So they are a native plant, something that you'll find in the many forests and perhaps maybe fields of the east coast of the United States. And as we make our way right around the corner, we come to this tulip tree with at least one leaf that's now starting to turn colors. This one I think is really interesting since you can really see like where the deep green of the chlorophyll is now starting to fade away into yellow. Tulip trees are usually some of the first trees in the landscape to change color. Now, just give it a few more weeks and the changes on this one particular tree, it's going to be a lot more drastic. Now, another change that you can see on these trees is the flower that actually appears right around this time of the year. So here is the cone-like blossom right at the center. Now, these flowers are actually important for a number of wildlife that act as pollinators. In fact, they produce a very, very sweet nectar that bees absolutely love. Now, you might have had tulip poplar honey before. They're very popular, and sometimes you'll find them in farmers markets or health food stores. Okay, everybody, and why don't we go ahead now and take this opportunity to rest here for a moment and conduct our poll of the day. So let me go ahead and pull up the poll right now. All right, so today I wanted to ask you folks if you had any favorite activities during the fall time. Now, if you are anything like me, then you probably get super, super, super excited about fall. Honestly, there's really nothing like the experience of getting up in the morning and feeling the brisk autumn chill in the air. And of course, seeing all the incredible changes happen in the landscape, all the reds, the yellows, the golds, all the birds everywhere. It really is something else. Now, in the poll, I've just pretty much listed some of the many countless activities you can do around this time of the year. But of course, feel free to add your own favorite activity in the comments. I personally love to go hiking in all times of the year, but autumn, I think, is when the landscape really comes to life. All right, so it looks like most of us, actually all of us, have voted. So let's go ahead and see what you folks have thought. So let's go ahead and share these results. And it looks like, there we go, as expected, something like close to 59% of you prefer hiking and walking, as do I. I mean, like hiking and walking is just one of my favorite activities to do. At a close second, we have leaf peeping, which makes sense since this is, of course, the fall season. So plenty of really incredible, gorgeous colors all around. Followed by birding, running, and approximately one or two of you have chosen yoga and playing sports. So definitely a lot of activities to do here in Central Park. All right, so let's go ahead and actually continue on now with our walk. And from here, we can exit out of the Great Hill and continue on northwards towards the Northwoods. All right, so while it's mostly still very much green in here right now, the Northwoods, I think, is a great spot to start looking for some of these early signs of fall. So definitely a lot of native trees and plants here in the woodland, especially deciduous trees like maples, oaks, walnuts. You'll see a lot of wild cherries here. Basically the type of plants that you might expect a fall foliage change to happen to. Right around the path, as we make our way around the corner, we come across these very, very large, massive sweet gum trees. And if you are familiar with the Northwoods, then you have definitely seen these trees before. Notice their massive trunks just popping up along the side of the trail. Sweet gums, they get their name from the fact that, yes, you can actually chew on their resin, much like chewing gum. But they're not going to be as overly sweet like the kind of gum that you might buy in a pack at the grocery store. These are actually very, very bitter. But historically, they were chewed on by many different groups of Native people as well as early Americans well before the advent of modern-day chewing gum. So sweet gums are, of course, a fall favorite, especially because of their colors. Here we've got its star-shaped leaf with just a hint of that yellow color that you might come to expect with the later season. Right next to it, over on the right-hand side, you can see the spiky seed ball of the sweet gum tree. So very much a common presence, especially on the ground this time of the year when the trees start dropping them in very, very large, massive numbers. And right around the corner, we come to a very familiar site. This is the block house. Now, this former fort from 1814, as some of you might know, once housed a small garrison of soldiers that were tasked with defending New York City. But nowadays, it sits empty as it overlooks Harlem towards the north. During the early 1800s, this area probably would not have been as heavily forested as it is today, since the soldiers needed a clear line of sight in order to spot the enemy from afar. Over the decades, however, nature has since reclaimed the surrounding hillside, and these days the blockhouse is nestled deep in the Northwoods. Now, just by taking a quick glance at this image, you might not see too many signs of fall just yet. But of course, the forest is brimming with activity, as is all of the wildlife, the trees, the plants. They all start sensing small but significant changes in the air, just like clockwork. So looking at the ground below, we can see the empty discarded shells of beech nuts, maybe perhaps placed here by a very hungry squirrel, putting on some weight for the winter. These come from beech trees, of course, which are pretty common throughout Central Park. And by the way, yes, you can actually indeed eat these beech nuts. So you can put them in pesto, you can put them in cakes, pies, basically whatever recipe that calls for any type of nuts. They're really super tasty and they're just packed full of nutrition. So no wonder then that wildlife like squirrels and birds just love them so much. And of course, speaking of birds, September is a great month to start picking up your binoculars again and head back into the park, since we've just started our fall migratory season, or we're a couple of weeks into the season. So lots of birds to watch out for right now as they make their way to wintering grounds further south. So right here, for example, we can see this hermit thrush. So usually hermit thrushes, you can start seeing them in Central Park around September. They love eating up all the berries on the trees and shrubs of the Northwoods, like service berries and pokeberries. So if you are a birder, then go ahead and start checking out for these plants if you really want to spot them here in the park. Another bird that you might start encountering at the Northwoods right around this time is something called the ruby-crowned kinglet. Now, these bouncy little songbirds, they can be seen on low branches in dense vegetation, basically fluttering all full of energy as they forage for food. Now, when excited, the ruby-crowned kinglet, they show off a bright red crown at the top of its head. Note also the olive green color right above, along with the white and yellow wing and tail feathers. So definitely a nice little bird to spot if you can spot them. Now, for those of you who are not as big of a birder as the rest of us, here is another common bird that you folks might have definitely seen around in the park, even, of course, if you aren't much of a birder. This one is called the blue jay, and it's very, very easy to identify, especially with all of its bright blue plumage. You might have also heard them with their distinctive, harsh, loud calls that can basically be heard from a mile away. Now, even though we haven't quite hit peak fall foliage season just yet here in the park, the birds can certainly sense the changes in the air all around them. Of course, anyone can go birding. You don't really need to be an expert at all. That's one of the great things about Central Park. Nature is just so easily accessible, and you can pretty much find gems such as blue jays really wherever you go. Okay, folks, and now we made it towards the last stop on the walk. And here in this part of the Northwoods, you'll really see this incredible water body known as the lock cascade its way down towards the ravine. So very much a picture-perfect spot to end off our walk. Now, even though there aren't too many leaves changing color just yet, as we've seen, nature is very much underway in the process of transitioning over towards the new season. All right, folks, so that does it for me. And don't forget to check out our Movies in Central Park tour if you haven't already done so. Now, on this brand new tour that we're giving, we're going to be taking a look at all the popular filming locations here in Central Park. So we'll take a look at the mall. We'll take a look at the Bethesda Terrace and Fountain. Of course, we'll also take a look at Conservatory Water. So please do check the comments for the link in order to sign up for this tour. It should be a nice little tour for everybody. And of course, you can also follow us on all of our social media channels, including Instagram and Facebook. I'll be here for the next few moments if you have any questions. But otherwise, from all of us here at the Central Park Conservancy, thank you all so much. Stay safe and be well. Have a good day, folks.